Good morning, friends and colleagues. Welcome to our first plenary of CAEP 2026, Advocating Now, Why, How, and If. As emergency physicians, we're often the front line for patient care, but we are also often the front line for advocating for our patients and for the healthcare system. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from two of the most respected and seasoned advocates in Canadian emergency medicine. It's my pleasure to first introduce Dr. Alan Drummond, one of Canada's most respected emergency physicians and a tireless advocate for patients, physicians, and the healthcare system. Hailing from Perth, Ontario, Alan has spent more than 4 decades exemplifying the very best of our profession through clinical excellence, courageous advocacy, and dedicated service to patients and communities across Canada. A champion of rural and community emergency medicine, he has helped shape healthcare policy, advance patient and healthcare worker safety, and mentor generations of physicians, including me. Beyond medicine, Alan is very well known for his knowledge of fine wine, proof that appreciation for excellence extends well beyond the emergency department. His contributions through clinical practice, education, research, leadership, and advocacy have left an enduring mark on emergency physicians in Canada. Many of us have learned from him, worked alongside him, or been inspired by him. Welcome, Alan. I'd also like to welcome Blair Bigham, who has been an advocacy mentor for me since he was a resident working with CAEP Public Affairs, not yesterday. Blair has been taking care of sick patients both on and off shift for over 20 years, first as a paramedic and now as an ER and ICU doc. He moonlights as a journalist and editor for Postmedia and the Investigative Journalism Bureau, Canada's only teaching newsroom based at the U of T School of Public Health, where he is the director of the newly launched Centre for Health Communication. I'd like to welcome them both for our first plenary.
Aside from being diehard emergency doctors and advocates, we don't have any conflicts that we need to declare today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Al to start with a rundown of emergency departments in the news.
So it's very curious, I find, that Blair and I are here talking to a room full of advocates. I mean, it seems bizarre to me, actually. Each and every one of you, every day, at the bedside, advocates for your patients to make sure that with the limited resources that we have available to us and to them, that they get the best chance at achieving health. So my hat's off to you all. Thank you for being here. I don't know how much you're going to learn from us, but the one thing that we hope we will achieve is that by understanding that if we are going to get things better, because they can't get much worse, then we may have to step outside of our comfort zones to push government and decision makers to give us the resources required so that we can do the job properly. 16 million Canadians come to our departments every year seeking comfort and health. And 41 million Canadians go to bed at night knowing that we are there for them if illness or injury should strike either them or their families. So you do a good job, and I'd like to acknowledge all of you. So for the last 30 years, actually, every day I find some time to cross the country with respect to journalistic articles on what's happening in emergency medicine so that I can better understand what the trends are, what the problems are, and what the common solutions may be. So some of these are a bit concerning. The stories are upsetting in many, many ways, but I mean, this is what the public is now perceiving, us to be. So in a nod to the Guess Who in Winnipeg, I'm going to break it to you gently that, in fact, many of you, the millennials in this room, have nothing to do with any of this. This is a curious gift that people of my generation have left for you. An era of complete dysfunction with respect to emergency department delivery. So this is dating back to the mid-1990s, actually. But during the first couple of decades of this century, the reported tragedies were quite rare, actually. So every now and again, you would hear about a tragic death in a waiting room or at home, having left an emergency department. Pat Vipari, who left a Kitchener-Waterloo emergency department because the wait was too long with her headache and then died of meningitis. Vince Moda in a suburb of Calgary, who again got tired of the wait and went home and then ultimately died as a result of complications from appendicitis. And then little Kyle Martin, who died from unrecognized sepsis in Credit Valley Hospital in Mississauga. He had been triaged at the time by a little nice lady in a smock. And of these deaths, the only one that translated into some positive action was the death of Kyle Martin, because it forced the Ontario government to acknowledge the value of CTAS. And shortly after his death, CTAS was introduced in Ontario, and thereafter across the country. So some good things can come of these tragedies. The one that I thought really shook me and shook many of us, and we're hopeful that something meaningful would come of a tragic death, was the death of Brian Sinclair in this city at the Winnipeg Health Sciences Center, where he was left in the waiting room for 34 hours and ultimately died of urosepsis. There was an inquest. There was a lot of focus, I think, on racism, which I think is entirely appropriate. There was a 300-page inquest report. There were some heavy hitters in Canadian emergency medicine that testified at that inquest, including Grant Ennis. And of the 300-page report, there were about 3 paragraphs relating to crowding. So, what has really changed? Noah Wiley has certainly become a little more craggy, that's for sure. But have things really, really changed? Have things gotten better? Well, you know damn well that they have not. I'm just going to go I could spend an hour talking about news stories, but I'm just going to go through some of the major stories in the past year. And then there was a case in Carbonear, Newfoundland, where Robert Power presented to the emergency department with dyspnea, with a background history of COPD, where he was left to wait for about 10 hours, and then he died of a cardiac arrest in the emergency department. Scott Wilson, who was a public affairs member of our committee, had been on CBC the week before, sort of saying, somebody's going to die unless we deal with ER wait times and dysfunction. And then his widow, Mrs. Power, said, well, it's funny, I heard that on the radio, and this is what happened to my husband. I think probably one of the more concerning was the case of a lady who was treated in an ambulance bay in New Brunswick. It was a sort of transition unit, they called it. And the new premier of New Brunswick said, well, it's just entirely unacceptable, but it's either care there or no care, which I think is not appropriate. And I think one of the reason that this came to light was that her daughter went on Facebook and posted this page about her mom's experience. And I think it's worth repeating. No bathroom, no curtains, no place to wash your hands. You eat where you should, basically. And there is no privacy, there is no dignity. This has to change. In Laval, Mr. Matsuano went to the Laval hospital with chest pain, where he waited for 10 hours before dying of a cardiac arrest. At the time, the occupancy rate in the emergency department was 173%, so no stretchers to see anybody. In a case which really rocked Ontario, the tragic case of Finlay van der Werken, a young man who presented to an emergency department in Southern Ontario with early signs of sepsis. He got through the door, but was basically deteriorated over a period of 8 hours before he was finally seen by a physician, and by then it was frankly too late. Since we're in Manitoba, we'll talk about Winnipeg, where it seemed their share of bad press. But this was the case of Stacey Ross, who in January presented with chest pain, was sent home as viral illness, returned several days later, where she waited yet again, and then died as a result of cardiac arrest. And the hospital freely admitted that they had made an error. And the telling thing was, the young daughter, who sort of said, I don't have a mother. Like, the healthcare system let me and let my mother down. A very stark case in Edmonton recently of Mr. Sri Kumar, who presented to an Edmonton hospital where wait times are beyond ridiculous on a good day, where he also waited for an extended period of time before dying and succumbing to cardiac arrest. And then lastly, in a case which is near and dear to my heart, not in that rural closures I think are quite concerning. And Tumbler Ridge had issues with closures on weekends because of doctor shortages, and so the plan was to have extra ambulances available to take people to Dawson Creek. And yet, even that system, failed. Is it working? Okay. And then lo and behold, several months later, we know what happened to Tumbler Ridge. Thankfully, the emergency staff were working that day and ambulances were available, but it just goes to show, how bad things have become. So the take-home message is that healthcare, whether you like it or not, is political, and all politics is local. And this is why your stories and your community hospitals or your city departments matter, and why they can actually affect positive change.
All the cases that Al just ran through are from this year, in the last 6 months. There's no doubt that there's a crisis going on. The only question is how all of us are going to work together to solve it. But I hear quite often, and I think Al's heard the same, love what you do, but it's not for me. Seems risky. So what we're going to do today is try to demystify some of those risks, acknowledge the ones that are real, and give you a couple of tricks to not eliminate them, but at least mitigate them. Because it is true that advocacy can lead to harm for ourselves. We can have reputational risk. For example, we can get it wrong and affect our own credibility. We can get labeled as shit disturbers. We can get labeled as a thorn in the side. And in some circumstances, that can actually make it more difficult for our voices to carry weight. There are things that are a little more tangible than that. Allegations of defamation can certainly arise out of any type of advocacy, communication, or media work. We can always seek or have retribution from our employers or our institutions. Sometimes we can even be hauled up in front of, say, a medical advisory committee, a CEO, or a dean. And of course, we are, as professionals, accountable to our college. But the good news is that CMPA actually acknowledges that advocacy is one of those flower petals in CanMeds. It will defend us for advocacy work related to our practice of medicine. Now, there are some caveats. All professional obligations still apply, whether you're working in a clinic, a hospital, or on social media. Think of how you're professional in an emergency department when someone's going off on you about a wait time. You don't yell at them, you don't strike out at them, you don't swear at them. Right, Al? The same applies to your advocacy work. As long as you have that decorum of professionalism, you can be protected by CMPA. But we are going to challenge the definition of professionalism today, because modern times require modern strategies for getting through the noise and getting someone's attention in this media ecosystem. At the same time, we have to remember that the organizations we work for, like the colleges, have their own rules, and that there may be times when an insider approach is more effective than an outsider approach. But the bottom line is that we find that if we're respectful, even when there's disagreements or tension, we can navigate a path through that. Let's look at a couple examples. Many of you will know one of my heroes, Dr. Najma Ahmed, who has been a gun rights advocate in this country and had a concerted attack against her by a gun lobby group that actually not only urged its members to file CPSO complaints against Dr. Ahmed, but also posted a how-to guide to do so. And then our profession stood up and recognized her advocacy efforts with a national award. Many of you will know Caitlin Stockton and her work out in British Columbia after she faced retribution for warning the public of severe delays in her emergency department. Not only did the law back her up, but she has also been recognized for her advocacy work and is about to be recognized again here at this conference. There's also a new CAEP statement on harassment and bullying of emergency physicians by organizational and system leaders. And if you want to scan that QR code, you can download it from CGEM. Sorry, I do a podcast for another journal, and I'm always used to saying their name. But at the end of the day, we have safety in numbers. When we stand up together, we can speak the truth. Not only is it one of our charter rights, but it is definitely something that time and time again has proven, uncomfortable as it may seem, to work out for the patients that we're speaking on behalf of. So let's go from theory to strategy and try to talk about the actual ways that we can all get involved. And there are two approaches here. The first is to take an insider track. Many of you do that already. You work on committees, you do research, you do QI, you have a leadership role, you try to socialize or champion certain efforts in your emergency department or hospital. And then once in a while, there'll be an organizational approach to advocacy that you participate in. But despite concerted effort since the 90s, things are getting worse and not better. The insider track has objectively failed. And so that might require some outsider advocacy. Certainly Al and I have decided that that is a place to spend our energy. And so we take to social media. We write letters in newspapers. We write op-eds for digital publications. We write commentaries for medical journals. We initiate campaigns. We speak with journalists. We train as journalists. And we engage politicians outside of the usual chain of command. So when we're doing that, we can't just start talking. We have to have a bit of a strategy. So here's a quick preview of a strategy that can help take your idea of what needs to be advocated for and turn it into an actual program. The first, of course, is to define the problem. This is something all of us are very good at. We are problem solvers, and so following up with a solution is also very easy. But it can be extremely difficult to turn your problem and your solution into a message. Now, sometimes I can stand up in front of 1,000 people and have a single message that can get through. But other times, I need to stratify my strategy for subpopulations. This might be my subpopulation. That might be my subpopulation. Residents in the room might be my subpopulation. And so my communication strategy might change. What won't change is that regardless of how I share my message, it is always rooted in the same foundation, one based on my observation, my expertise, and of course grounded in both science and humanity. And this is an important takeaway. The data that informs my advocacy does not actually need to be part of my message. It's informing it, it's real, it's in my brain, but I don't have to say a statistic when I'm sharing a message. Maybe I just share a story about a person. Maybe I share something personal about my shift last week. This is where we try to turn a message and make it sticky. And this requires a massive amount of creativity and trial and error before we figure out how I can connect with each of you. So the first thing we often do, and the PA committee does this, is we brainstorm. We say, okay, how are we going to get our message across? Sometimes we'll test different options. If you open up a news app for the Globe and Mail or CBC or the New York Times, the headline you see might not be the same as the headline of the person next to you, because they're always testing headlines to see what resonates. Then you want to make sure it's relatable. Target it for that specific audience. During SARS, I was working in LA, and we noticed that we had a lot of Latina housekeepers in our ICU ending up on ECMO. That is a very specific target population that requires some creativity to understand their perspective and their space so that we can interact with them where they're at. And then lastly, we have to break through the noise. The health information ecosystem, or the information ecosystem in general, is rapidly evolving. Our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And so getting your message out there requires some tricks. My top 3 tricks are to try to introduce a real tension. We don't want to make it seem like rainbows and puppy dogs. I want to try to link it to something timely happening in society. I'm a sepsis researcher. The best day of my life is when Madonna canceled her show because she was in the ICU with sepsis. I've never done more radio hits than on that day, because all of a sudden everybody wanted to learn about sepsis. And if you're an ophthalmologist, you know that the day to reach out to the media is before the solar eclipse, not after, when everybody is visiting with vision loss. Counterintuitiveness is another one that works really, really well. We're going to have an example of that coming up. So let's talk about the medium. Let's start with something very traditional, the written word, something that is very near and dear to my type of practice. And we're going to talk about leaking, we're going to talk about letters, and we're going to talk about op-eds. So first of all, here's an example of an internal letter that was written by physicians to management at St. Joe's, Toronto, and it got leaked. The letter was obtained by the Toronto Star and ended up on the front page. Recently in Alberta, physicians compiled a list of deaths and near misses from emergency department waits. CBC News got that document. I don't know how that happened. But sometimes internal letters make their way into the hands of journalists. So I want to give you a little bit of a briefing on how to leak information to a journalist like me. If I have a document, it's worth $1 million to me. I take it to my editor, I say I have a document, it shows bad things are happening, and they say, let's run it tomorrow. If I go to my editor and say, Al called me and said there's some crazy shit going on in Perth, they say, all you got is Al's word. I need a document. So if you're going to share a document, I just want to make you aware of some digital security tips. Number 1, every single thing you do at work can be audited. There are always audit trails. If you want to leak a document, you can take a photo of it on your screen, not using your work phone, but using your personal phone. You can share it with a journalist through personal email, but don't forward me an email through your work account. And don't print documents on a work printer. If you're sending something, you might want to crop certain things out. Crop very carefully. And when you do share something with a journalist, make it very clear. This is not for attribution. I'm at risk if my name is made known. And a journalist will look at that information that you share and either say, I don't know, that's not very juicy. Put your name on it or I can't use it. And then you say, all right, I'm out. Or they say, whoa, yeah, I imagine you'll get in a lot of trouble for this. I'm going to protect your identity. So those are a couple of tips that you can use when you're making the risk assessment and deciding whether or not you're going to work with a journalist by leaking a document. But there are much less risky things that you can do. And if you want to put pen to paper, there is no better person to tell you how to do that than Al Drummond.
Thank you very much. So I actually liked letters to the editor. I think I've done like 500 letters to the editor that have been published over the 30 years or so that I've been at this. And I like it because, like, in the social media world, you know, it's very reflex. Sometimes you say things you probably shouldn't have said in the heat of the moment. And whereas with a letter, you got to take a little bit of time. You got to gather your thoughts, put pen to paper. I've learned a couple. This is a review of a book about letters that published in the Globe and Mail called "Shocked and Appalled," which I thought was hilarious. And so I never use that I am shocked and appalled. Of course I'm shocked and appalled, but I never say that. And I never use the word crisis, because if everything is a crisis, then nothing is a crisis. So I strictly avoid those kind of phrases. When I write a letter to the editor, there are a couple of things I really push for. One is, well, you have to be concise, because it's demanded of you. But I always make sure that it's patient-centered. I also make sure that there's a solution attached to the problem. I always look for something catchy that I know is going to be either quotable or is going to be, on the top of the letters to the editor section. The other nice thing about the letter to the editor is that people read these things, actually. And I can't tell you how many times I have written a letter to the editor only to be contacted by CBC, CTV, The Globe, The Star, saying, "Oh, we read your letter to the editor. That's kind of intriguing. We'd like to talk more about it." So, you're not throwing stuff into the abyss. People actually respond to these letters, and you can get a real positive reaction. So, my wish for all of you today is that sometime in the next year, when there's a story that pertains to an interest of yours or your community, write the letter. Give it a whirl. See what happens. You might be very pleasantly surprised by the positive impact.
Letters tend to be short. 100 words is pretty generous. If you're looking to expand on an issue and write an op-ed or a commentary or an essay, most publications will give you 600 to 800 words, which is not a ton. So you have to be really, really concise. Let's talk about a few quick tips. You want a single, bold argument. This is not a, well, some people think this and some people think that type of style. You want it to be timely. You want it to be very tight, rooted in fact, but clear in what your opinion is. And it should have good tempo. One of the most annoying things in an op-ed is when you're repeating the same idea over and over. So you want to keep it moving. Pull the reader through argument, 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 so that they can get to the punchline. You want to be credible, but generally by excluding your hospital affiliation, you will avoid almost all of the heat. And then lastly, match your outlet to your audience. Sometimes the Globe and Mail is not the right place for a piece. Maybe it's today's parent. Think about who you're trying to change the behavior of with your advocacy and go to where they're at. So we're going to show you a little example of how this might work.
Blair, you're an editor at a paper.
Yeah.
Look, I'm a doctor in Perth, and I have got a great idea.
Tell me.
No, I mean, man, this is Pulitzer Prize material.
Okay.
Yep. Doctors and nurses are afraid for their lives. Small town hospital worse than downtown Baltimore on a Friday night. What do you think of that?
That's it? Al, I already know that. It's an ER. Rough, tumble, drunk people, high people, old people with dementia. Of course it's violent. I mean, that's just part of the job.
Well, I beg to differ, but let me just say this. We are totally pissed off. Like, we are so done with this scenario. We've had, nurses stabbed with bandage scissors. We are really afraid. And you know what really pisses us off? The next hospital over, 30 kilometers away, same demographic, same size hospital, they put in metal detectors.
Metal detectors? It's that bad?
Yeah, and in the very first month, they found 2 guns, 6 Bowie knives, and some guy even brought a machete. It could have been the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in that department.
I didn't know it was that bad. They actually found guns and a machete with the metal detector?
They did indeed.
All right, well, you guys got to get metal detectors too.
Well, I would love to get a metal detector, but unfortunately, our hospital is $18 million in the hole, and in order to balance the budget, they've cut our security guards.
No, they're cutting. All right, Al, let's talk.
Okay.
So there are lots and lots of good ideas that get pitched to editors, but editors have heard most of them. You need to find a way to make it unique, novel, and timely, and surprising. Let's move from the traditional written word to social media and talk about impact and risk here. I'm going to start with sort of the light side, and then Al's going to get into the darker side. I think the number one thing to know about social media is that people are not following ideas or information. People are following you. I have tweeted out huge, multi-year, groundbreaking, award-winning news investigations. But this is my #1 tweet of all time. It's poetic. I'll take credit for that. But there's nothing in there that's new. There's no information. But it's personal. #1 tweet in my track record. #2 tweet. This is our cat, Doug. Doug went out for brunch with us. We took a picture. We tweeted it. It was mid-pandemic. People love Doug. Now we post about Doug quite frequently. It is my highest engaging material. It is somewhat embarrassing that this is the best I can do to engage with people. But what it does is it builds an audience that doesn't just view me as a physician or an expert or a journalist. It views me as a person. The audience that I've been able to cultivate online knows me. I try to get to know them. And then when I do have something really important that I think they need to hear about, if I have a behavior that I think they need to adopt, I think I have a better chance of getting through with that vulnerability that I can share online. Sometimes it does go a little bit too far. I had a top knot. My husband was not a fan. So we did a poll to get some engagement. There's a top knot. No more top knot. But we've seen this kind of go sideways before. You might remember the Medkini controversy, where a bunch of vascular surgeons posted online pictures of themselves in bikinis. And there was then a comment in the Journal of Vascular Surgery about the lack of professionalism of current trainees. There was a huge backlash. People were posting bikini shots everywhere. And the next thing you know, that was retracted. The definition of what involves professionalism in an online era, where it is my job to cultivate trust with the public, requires a certain vulnerability that physicians in the past never needed to share. And there's a great opinion piece about abandoning the requirement for physicians to separate their personal and professional personas online in BMJ. Not only does your audience follow you, but they follow other people. And being able to know where your audience intersects with people who are much more famous or popular or regarded than you is a great way to cross-link and get your message amplified. And so it's always good to know who out there is able to resonate with my message and share it with an even wider audience. But of course, social media is not all fun and games.
So Twitter is a cesspool, but I love being in that cesspool. I'm combative by nature, and that's my environment, my element, and I love it. But you know, altruistically, I thought this was going to be a great vehicle for getting the message across about emergency department issues. But there are a lot of trolls out there, and the first thing to learn, and it can be soul-sucking, exhausting to deal with. So the first thing to realize is that, you know, you don't really have to deal with them. It's not really about you. Most of the time it's them sort of looking for some kind of sort of validation in a pathetic sort of way. So one of the first things I learned is don't feed the bears. Like, you know, like engage for a short period of time, but, you know, if it's becoming ridiculous, you know, walk away. I really try to limit my engagement with anonymous accounts, maybe Russian bots, maybe the Conservative Government of Ontario. I have no idea, but I make sure that you know, I'm not going to get into some long-winded discussion with some account that has about 5,000 numbers. So I have like this kind of 3 strikes and you're out. So if we're not really getting along, let's just cut the crap and move on. Sometimes people try to kill him with kindness. Aaron O'Toole of the Conservative Party is one of the kindest people I've ever met on Twitter. It doesn't matter what they say about him, he always comes back, you know, loving them to death, which is not my style. And you know, my take-home message is, you know what? If you're really being worn out by the troll, like, block them and walk away. One thing, there's a difference between trolling And there's another thing between sort of defamation of character. And one thing I will not tolerate on Twitter or any other social media platform is to be defamed or slandered. And I don't fuck around. And if people try that line on me, as the gun lobby has tried now for close to 20 years, I make sure that they know I will come after you and I will sue you. And I will spend my money and I will happily do it. So you can either play this game and continue, or I'm going to come after your ass. And you would be surprised by how many cowardly lions there are in the basements of Alberta that suddenly delete their accounts. The next one to learn about, which I didn't really learn about until early on, was the sea lion, which is somebody who tries to pretend that they are naive to the issue, and they want to engage you and suck up your time and your energy and circuitous arguments about the main point that you were raising in the first place. And it's like you really have to sort of recognize it when you see it and move on. And to quote my Jen Guntner, also a Winnipeg native, famous gynecologist and author, who, when faced with this, says, "I'm not your librarian," which I think was a great line and something I use all the time. Now, tweeting, can get you into some degree of trouble, but in the case of somebody I dearly love, Trevor Jane, who in 2013 was tweeting about physicians leaving the QE2 emergency department, having to look after hospitalized patients, quitting, putting the hospital in some degree of scrutiny. Got a lot of pushback from the PEI government, but Trevor is a warrior. If you haven't learned that already, and he doesn't shake easily, believe me. And he got a lot of positive support from the PEI Medical Society that sort of basically emphasized Blair's point, which is like doctors have a right to call things out. And as one of the great lines of Trevor, which I think we should all sort of take home with us today, is if you're going to advocate for patients, you've got to be prepared for the heat. Blair, you ignorant slut. What have you done? You put this on social media, and you had better take it down yesterday.
Al, look, I didn't think that you'd be upset by it. Let's talk about it. Thank you for coming and letting me know about it. I'm sure, in hindsight, I could have maybe given you a heads up about this.
Well, you have a reputation for being a reasonably smart guy. You should know better. I mean, this puts the hospital in a bad light. It puts the department in a bad light. It puts me as the chief in a bad light.
Well, okay, fair enough. Tell me, what about the tweet is particularly upsetting?
You're highlighting our negative wait times. This is bad for the hospital. It's bad for the community. You're undermining the confidence of our community in the hospital. You must take it down. Buddy, we are being scrutinized by the ministry. We are already behind the 8 ball, and here you are calling attention to our not great situation.
I hear you. But I mean, the ministry already knows about our wait time. So does the public. This was in the newspaper just last week.
Yeah, but why are you adding fuel to the fire, man? What are you doing?
Al, here's how I see it. I'm actually trying to put out the fire. I'm letting the community know that we're sorry. I'm letting them know this isn't an acute problem. This is a chronic problem. Look, 9 hours is nothing. You know that. It was heartbreaking to work that shift. Every single case started with an apology. I think the public already knows what's going on, and it's important to show it. We know it too. We're owning up to it. We're not trying to bury it under the rug.
Yeah, unfortunately, everybody knows that you work in this hospital. This was not an anonymous tweet, so now it is widespread knowledge that our staff are dissatisfied with the wait times, and you're putting us all in a bad situation.
I hear you. I don't know that everybody who sees that tweet knows which hospital I work at. We're not the only hospital that has long wait times. Every hospital has long wait times.
Everybody knows you work here.
I don't think everybody on Twitter knows that I work here. But regardless, even our next door neighbors have this problem. Every province has this problem. This is a crisis, Al, and it's only getting worse. I mean, come on, that tweet could have been way worse.
Look, I know it's a problem. Look, I know you're trying to be a good Canadian citizen, reaching out to the community, and you're being a sympathetic guy. But could you not be a little more careful what you say in the future before you put us in this situation?
I'll take it under consideration. I totally hear what you're saying. I don't want to make your job harder. I don't want the ministry to penalize us. But I stand by the tweet, Al. You wouldn't accept a 9-hour wait time.
Well, maybe I wouldn't. But in the future, Blair, please, could we just be a little more careful with what we say on social media so that I don't lose my job and our hospital doesn't get sort of scrutinized anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for talking to me about this. And if anybody else ever comes after you for something I tweet, I'm always happy to defend what I write. Just have them email me.
Thank you, Blair.
Thanks, Al. It's hard to navigate those conversations. Sometimes they go really poorly. But most of the time I find that whenever you advocate outside of the usual chain of command, there's normally one word, one half sentence that really irks somebody. And if you ask them to point it out, normally they see that of everything you've been advocating for, what they're upset about is actually just one small piece of it. And normally they're upset about it because it triggers a certain guilt or embarrassment within them. And if you just have that conversation, I find that a lot of the time people will have a little bit of grace, understand your position. They still might not be happy about your advocacy, but they're going to respect the way you did it. Tough conversations, you get better at them over time. And it's also really important to know who your support network is within your institution. Who has your back? Who protects you? I know that when I was a resident, Aleem Pardon was my program director, and he was Teflon. He was like a bulletproof vest. He came to me once after a complaint from senior leadership. I lost my mind on him. And he said, you know what? I think I'm just never going to bring these complaints to you ever again. And I know that he did a lot to protect my ability to speak out. Oftentimes, all a hospital wants is for you not to name them. Not in your byline, not in your little bio at the end of your piece, not in your social media bio. You can say, I'm an academic emergency physician in Winnipeg. I think that narrows it down. But as long as you don't say where you work, the PR people are going to leave you alone. Your colleagues, maybe not. But again, we're emergency doctors. We have far more heated conversations trying to get somebody an MRI for CAUDA in the middle of the night. We can handle this. All right. Talking to journalists. There's nothing more impactful than a frontline voice in the press. But it takes a bit of training to be able to do an interview, especially on TV or live radio. And unfortunately, our plenary that tries to be a workshop is running out of time. And so we're going to encourage you to consider formal performance training if that's something that you're really interested in. Get rid of your ums, your ahs, your stumbling. Oh my God, that was ironic. Stumbling over your own words. Learn how to set up your laptop so that you can do a Zoom interview with a journalist without showing all your nose hairs. Okay, really quick, if you're going to talk to a journalist. Number one, you have to be clear. You have to use direct language. You want to state the stakes. Why should anybody care about this? Is this just inside baseball and you guys are complaining, or are there actual stakes? Remember, journalists serve the public. We work in the public interest. And so we need to know why the public should care. With that stated, it is okay to express emotion. You can feel sad, frustrated, angry, scared, happy, excited. overjoyed. And then you always want to bring it back to patient care. This is why billing issues generally do not get picked up very much in the media. It's really hard to connect them back to patients, back to public interest. Some places have had a little bit of success. The OMA's recent campaign had some success with that, but it's tricky. Of course, anecdotes have to balance privacy. You cannot violate privacy no matter what you do, ever. Social media, in the media, in a book. But it is okay to refer to composites. So you can have a composite of a patient who is waiting in an emergency department for 6 hours, and then you met them in a room or in a chair, and they ended up having an aortic dissection. And this is a composite of many things that you've seen that demonstrates the real event of delayed diagnosis due to long wait times. Lastly, you have to be accessible and available. Deadlines suck. Trust me, I work on deadline. I hate it. To be told you have to have this to me by 6 p.m. today, whether it's good or bad, we would never accept that in the emergency department. We'd be like, you can go home when your workup's complete. But in journalism, it's different. There are deadlines, and when a journalist calls and says, can you get back to me by Thursday at 4 p.m., they actually have been told that their deadline is probably Thursday at 6 p.m., and they still have to write something. So do your very best to accommodate journalists. PR people often tell me, there are deadlines tomorrow, we're just not going to respond. That is simply a lack of opportunity, a lost chance to engage the public. Try to be nimble, try to have a team who can help meet the needs of journalists when it's necessary.
Hey, Blair.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm a doctor at the Moose Jaw General.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, very sweet. And you write for the National Enquirer.
I do.
Yep. You know, I saw you wrote a piece in the Enquirer about a death in our emergency department waiting room just the other day, and I happen to know a lot about it. And you know, the fact is that you're missing some important details that I think are super important.
Really?
Really.
Wait, were you there?
But, well, I was there with a few others, but and so I'm very intimately aware of what happened to that patient. But you know, and you know, I'm concerned that the public should know because it impacts all of us. But you know, I'd get in so much trouble if my name was attached to anything I say to you.
I hear you. Well, I mean, I understand. Like, you're in a tough spot here. I appreciate you coming to me. Look, I don't want you to get in trouble by any means, but I agree. The public needs to know what's going on. What if we spoke on something called not for attribution, where you tell me a bit of background information, no names, you know, only the details you're comfortable with, and I'll report on that generally. I won't quote you, but I'll just use it to inform the piece that I write. And I won't name you or where you work.
So, like, I'm off the record.
It's kind of different from off the record. Off the record means anything we talk about goes in a box, and I can never talk about it ever again. This is called deep background, or not for attribution. It's where I'm allowed to write about what we talk about, but I'm not going to name you. I won't even say you're a physician. I'll just say somebody with familiarity with the circumstance.
So it wouldn't single me or my colleagues, nursing staff, out?
No, I'll make it gender neutral, age neutral, and I won't mention that you're a physician.
Well, that sounds okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, let's talk. The National Enquirer?
I'm sorry. So we're going to leave you with what I thought was like a pretty powerful message from one of our more senior colleagues, Urban Ip in Surrey. And you know, Fraser Health, as you know, often has lots of difficulties with respect to crowding and safety issues. And Urban, former CAEP board member, many years ago, sort of went out in the press and sort of said, I wouldn't take my mother there. It wouldn't be safe. So, you know, we're not suggesting that you channel your inner Urban, but that sometimes, you know, we have to take a firm stand to call attention to issues of public concern. So Thank you for your involvement and your attention. And we can be reached at the following sites or email addresses, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, thank you.
We're not on. Oh, there we are. Thanks so much, Blair and Al. I was taking some notes, and one of my esteemed colleagues in the audience asked if I was tallying the swears, and I was. So we got through this talk with 6, which I think is really good. I'm actually quite happy with that. So we now have time for questions. There's 2 mics out in the audience if anyone has questions for these 2 experts. One thing that I'd like to lead with is maybe some strategies for speaking with government and policymakers. Sometimes we're called as the emergency physicians to speak with policy experts, government, bureaucrats in our own communities, from a hyper-local level to a national level, and maybe some tips for that.
Sure. When you're advocating in what we would maybe call a legislative advocacy capacity or political advocacy capacity, I would say that 2 things to note. First is, are you speaking to the person who actually holds responsibility for the portfolio? So sometimes you think it's the Minister of Health who's responsible for a certain problem, but it's actually the Minister of Social Services. And so if you're going to chase that rare golden opportunity to sit down either with bureaucrats or with an elected member of government, make sure you're talking to the right person or the right team who actually has accountability for that portfolio. And then to Al's point, make sure that you have an ask, a clear solution. It's not just, there's a problem. If you have a solution that is bullet pointed, it's something that they can actually assign to somebody to cost out or assign to somebody to do an analysis on. If you just go to them with problems, you're going to get some very sympathetic nods, and that's about it.
And I'd add to that really I think the power in government is not necessarily the figurehead Minister of Health, but rather the bureaucrats that work below that minister. So it's not a losing proposition to be at the middle level to get your ideas introduced. And if you are unfortunate enough to appear in front of a parliamentary or Senate committee on any given topic, you have to realize that it's political theater. You have literally 5 minutes to make your point, and then you let the games begin as various parties try to spar and make points for the evening news. So don't be disheartened when you realize that you're just a bit player in a political game.
That's great, thank you. I think we have a question over here. Go ahead, thank you.
Great talk. I just have for both of you guys, looking for advice for young, early career physicians. When you look at advocacy from internal advocacy versus external advocacy, one thing that I wonder about is as you develop leadership positions, whether it be in the hospital or within the university, whether you find that may limit your ability to speak externally, and how you balance your career growth between climbing, say, hospital leadership or leadership outside of the hospital versus remaining kind of an external figure that's able to advocate pretty freely.
I think the public health folks know this best because they're not only in a structure, but they're paid by that structure quite explicitly. And so the question of insider versus outsider tactic is something I'm very fascinated by. On June 22nd, nice plug, CMAJ is publishing a framework on how physicians make these decisions around, am I going to be an insider and work in that committee structure where as you get deeper on the inside, your options to go outside become more and more limited? Or am I going to work on the outside and try to maintain good relationships with the inside? In my experience, the insiders and the outsiders kind of have some signal messages going back and forth, and we can work together to amplify issues. There are people very, very, very deep inside who recognize what they can change and what they can't change. And when they can't change something, they will often go to an outsider. And so I don't think it's a dichotomy. I think insiders and outsiders have unique roles. And yes, an insider can't go and do something in the Globe and Mail, but they can talk to someone at the Globe and Mail. They can talk to somebody who works on the outside, and they can work together to achieve their goals.
It's a great question. Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Another question that came to my mind was, and Blair alluded to this, but what do you do when there's an acute ask? So you work somewhere in a small community, you work in Perth, Ontario, and the local newspaper comes to you and says, we need a comment by the end of today. You're a workhorse emergency physician, not someone in leadership. How do you handle that, and what do you do immediately?
Do you want to go first?
Well, I always respond. Like, so I think I have a reputation in media for being responsive. And I think that's, with respect to the deadlines, that's super important. And so, I may get asked, I need something in the next 10 minutes. And I sort of drop what I do and speak. So it depends on what the issue is in terms of if it's local or national or provincial. But I think I've tried to imbue in CAEP public affairs over the last 25 years that we need a framework for being responsive to journalists if we really want to get our message across. And I think a key message that we didn't point out, which is important, is that politicians actually care about what's in the media and what's being said about them and their policies. They carefully monitor on an almost daily basis media responses to any initiative that they announce. And also, how that plays out in the various geographic regions of a province and how that plays out on various media. So it's an important advocacy tool. So, I try to make sure that I always give them something, even if it's just a pithy little quote. And the other thing that we didn't emphasize is that it's perfectly helpful and legitimate to provide a lot of backgrounders. So I have spent countless hours on the phone with journalists, to which I will never be attributed to anything in terms of my comment, but will give them all the background with relationships to crowding, violence, rural closures, so that they have a better context with which to frame a story. So it's unheralded, it's unrewarded, and yet it's a valuable part of the game.
I'll just add to that and say that I have a little litmus test when people say my deadline's today. Because what you don't want to do is waste your time, to be frank, on a small little story that's not actually going to move the needle in the long run. We all know that this is a long game. We're building relationships with journalists. We're indirectly building relationships with their editors and with their publication so that we can gain access to their audience. And so we do them, I'll say a favor, we respond to their requests as best we can. But if you don't know the journalist, if you don't really know the circumstance, my litmus test is to say, can we just chat on background? And if they say, no, I'm on deadline, I need a quote, I don't need to work with that journalist today. If they say, yeah, I get it, let's just talk background, maybe at the end of it I say, oh, you know who you should speak to? Or maybe at the end of it I say, all right, if you want to go on record and ask me this question again, we can do that. And so you can feel it out. You actually have a lot of control in that relationship to say, you know what, I appreciate you letting me do this confidentially on background, but I see where your story is going. Do you want to go on record for just 2 minutes and let me see what I can give you? Or if you really want, you can say, could I email you a quote or two after I talk to my media team? This is sensitive, but I do want to help you out. I do want to be named in this story, but let me talk to my media team and my chief. Let me see if I can get you a quote. It's probably not going to be as juicy as you'd like, but I'll get you something.
Yeah, and I think it's important to emphasize not to be a talking head. Like, it's nice when journalists call you that there's some acknowledgement that your opinion matters. But by the same token, if you don't know what you're talking about, it's better to shut up and say, I don't know anything about this, but let me find somebody who does.
Mm-hmm. We have another question over here.
Hello. Hi. I'll be brief because of time is short. My name is Brian O'Connell. I'm an emergency physician from Australia. I was asked to prepare to evacuate a small hospital from a bushfire in 2019, and now I work as an advocate and a lead in sustainable healthcare. Do you have any advice for advocating and engaging with our staff in emergency departments in becoming more sustainable and looking at climate risk from a community perspective?
Sorry, we actually, the speakers are all in front of us and we don't have our own ear monitors. So I'm going to stand in front of the speaker and get you to ask again, because Al and I couldn't hear that. I'm sorry. It's because of your sexy accent.
He's from Australia. You got it. Okay.
Thank you. It's an Irish accent, but I do live in Australia. The short question is, do you have any advice how we engage really busy emergency physicians in becoming more sustainable? I didn't know the answer to that a few years ago, but I'm learning about it now. And in terms of advocacy, I think it's a pretty important area.
So integrating advocacy in a way that keeps your career sustainable.
No, I think environmental sustainability.
Oh, environmental sustainability specifically. Oh, yes, okay. I struggle with this. It is hard to get environmental sustainability picked up in our current times. And so what I would say is I want you to probably focus on something that is, at first, far more narrow than you want. And then, once you're in, you can expand. I'll give you one example. Ventolin MDIs, salbutamol MDIs, pardon me, puffers, are horrible for the planet, right? There's something like 2% of emissions. And so that's like one little fact that I know an editor doesn't know. And so if you go to them and say, oh, these puffers are actually horrible for the environment, but the government won't fund the next generation puffer, that is a really tight story that an editor might say, oh, tell me more. And then you can, once you're in, you can say, oh, let me tell you about all the other things in healthcare that could be more sustainable. And so when you're taking a big, big topic, and wait times is one of them, access block is one of them, burnout, violence in the ER, the environmental crisis facing the planet, whatever big topic you have is not going to fly with an editor until you can break it down. But once you break it down, you're not selling your soul. You're then able to build it back up to some sizable mission that you feel good about. But I would say find a really small, counterintuitive, weird, unknown bit that can get your foot in the door, and then expand from there.
Thank you.
We're lucky in Canada to have some of the absolute goats of emergency medicine advocacy in terms of climate solutions. And our president-elect for our Canadian Medical Association, Dr. Courtney Howard, is one of those, and I would encourage you to talk to her. I'm sure you have. And I'm not sure if Joe Vipond is here. We have oh, right there. People who have really moved the needle on this, and we're very lucky for that.
Thank you so much. And just to say, I didn't even mention the word environmental, and I think you're right. You have to start with patients first. Yeah, that's one of the secrets. Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you so much. Great question.
Any further questions? So we've now cut our break short. I think we're all used to that in our professional lives. The next sessions will start at 10:45. I thank you so much for your attention, and thank you so much to our speakers. These two colleagues, friends, mentors of mine have given us a lot to think about, and we're all very lucky. Thank you very much.